Footballer Wesley Fofana suffered a very serious lower leg injury after, frankly, what was a completely uncalled for and unnecessary tackle earlier today. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. In this video, I'm going to teach you about the medical side here of what's going on with this injury and why I'm concerned that it might be even more severe than just the leg break. Here, of course, is the play where this happened, and we can see Fofana go in here and get tackled. And what basically leads to this whole sequence is the fact that his left foot plants and gets anchored into the ground as the Villareal defender here comes in and makes contact on the outside portion of his leg. Whenever a force comes in from the outside of the leg inward, we call that a valgus force because it's pushing the knee into a valgus position. So there's this valgus force that's being imparted on his leg here from this tackle. Now, unfortunately, because his foot is anchored into the ground, there's nowhere really for that lower portion of his leg to kind of move whenever that force comes in. And so as that valgus force continues to come in and make contact, ultimately you can see here his foot goes into this externally rotated position. So you can tell how his toes are pointed outward in relation to the rest of his tibia. And what that does is it's going to apply a little bit of twist to the lower portion of the leg. It's going to stress the ankle joint and lead to ultimately when this injury occurred. Now, unfortunately, in the follow through here, we can see a little bit of a kind of bony deformity. So a little bit of a step off, a change in the contour here as we go down along that leg. And so that little step off there is going to be, unfortunately, where we can see that the break occurred. One more view here we can see is Fofana plants with that left leg. The other player comes in, makes contact again, valgus load directed from the outside of the leg inward. And we can start to see a little bit of that external rotation in the foot, especially kind of here as he comes out of that position. You can tell how the toes again are pointed a little bit outward relative to the rest of his tibia. And then again, we can see that abnormal contour of that lower leg where typically, of course, we're expecting to see a nice straight lower leg here, but we can see where that break, potentially dislocation of the ankle would have occurred. Beyond the concern for a broken leg, I honestly also worry about the possibility of an ACL tear. If we look in this position here before the break even occurs, this view is kind of classic for what we see with an ACL tear. We see that foot a little bit externally rotated, that tibia is internally rotating, and we see the knee collapse inward into that dynamic valgus position. The trunk here is also a little bit tilted over that affected side, and so this is a very classic position where we can honestly see an ACL tear as well. The other player coming in here making contact is also going to tend to push that tibia forward, and that ACL is trying to prevent that tibia from moving forward relative to the femur, so it's even an additional load on his ACL beyond what we see with the twisting of that lower leg. Looking at our biodigital anatomy tool here, of course, I've highlighted the bones of the lower leg, and the two are going to be the tibia, which is your big hard shin bone, and then the fibula. Between these two bones, the tibia is considered the weight-bearing bone. It's what takes the majority of the load from the rest of your body. The fibula carries a little bit, but generally we're not as worried about the fibula when it breaks as we are compared to the tibia. What I want you to focus on down here at the ankle, however, is how the shape of the ankle joint affects the mobility of the ankle. You've got this talus that sits in between those two bones coming down, and so it's really hard for that foot to externally rotate or spin outward within that position. So whenever that foot gets externally rotated outward, what that does is it imparts this torsional stress, this twisting stress up through the tibia and the fibula, which contributes to the break and potentially dislocation of the ankle when we see these types of mechanisms. That foot's going to move really well up and down, but it doesn't want to spin to the side without twisting and imparting this torque and torsion up through the rest of the tibia. Remember, our bones do really well in terms of compression and when they're pulled, but they don't do very well when we twist them. And so here with Fofana, as he plants, that foot is externally rotated a little bit here. And what that's going to do is impart this twisting force up through his tibia, combined with that valgus load from the outside that ultimately is going to cause that break, potentially dislocation of the ankle joint, and possibly something like an ACL tear looking higher up in that kinetic chain. One of the big questions for immediate management is whether or not this was an open fracture, meaning if the bone punctured through or tore the skin. When the skin gets torn, there's risk of bacteria getting in there, and so you can develop infection and more complications from this injury. Initially, it's all about stabilizing the fracture, but they also are going to have to think about the other soft tissues like the ligaments in the ankle, and again, like I said, potentially the ACL up in the knee based on that position that we saw his knee go into, classic for something like an ACL tear. It's absolutely terrible to see something like this in a preseason friendly. I mean, his season is almost certainly going to be over after an injury this severe from, again, a completely just unnecessary tackle. So to review and summarize one more time here, as Fofana goes down and plants with that left foot anchors into the ground, and so now as the other player comes in, he imparts this valgus load, hitting on the outside of his leg, bending the knee, bending the leg inward, but because the foot is anchored and rotated out, you get this anchoring point at the end of your whole leg. That twisting force that goes up through the leg combined with that bending is when we worry about when the fracture would have occurred, plus or minus a dislocation of that ankle joint. This position of the knee being hit and collapsing inward also makes me worried about a possible ACL tear, so something that the team is also going to have to evaluate after they stabilize this initial injury. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later.